In the 1920s, the first Alaskan aviators flew into a world that was constantly trying to kill them. With no maps, compasses that were inaccurate, unreliable engines, and open cockpit airplanes, these pilots operated over hundreds of miles of hostile, unimproved wilderness with no fields, roads, or runways to land on. And all this with the same old, terrible Alaska weather. They weren't just aviators. They were cartographers, inventors, backcountry mechanics, explorers, and Arctic survival experts, willing to walk hundreds of miles at the drop of a hat or repair an engine under a tarp in a blizzard. From polar flights to connecting America with Asia, many paid the ultimate price with their lives to pave the way for modern cross-continental travel and the commercial aviation industry that we know today. My guest today is the living bridge to that era.
It's almost like you're in World War II, except you're not getting shot at, but you're risking your life every day. There was a period where pilots ordered airplanes with open cockpit when they could have been in the cabin because they couldn't feel what's going on. Every time you take off, it was like going to the moon because there was nobody to come look for you. No place set up to land. You had to find it. Engine failures were fairly common. You don't have to imagine what the stress level was.
His name is Richard Wien, and he is author of the book, The Flying Wiens. In the 1920s, his father, Noel Wien, at only 24 years old, started Alaska's first commercial flying operation. Noel is widely regarded as the first bush pilot, and his son Richard grew up flying with and learning from those original bush pilots. He is here to tell us the story of those aviation pioneers. Okay, a couple of things before we get started. One, if you want to buy Richard's book, The Flying Wiens, I've put the link in the video description where you can purchase it. And two, if you want to stay updated on what's going on with the Coffee in a Hangar podcast, you can go to coffeeinahangar.com and join our email list. Enjoy the podcast. So what was Alaska like as far as additional infrastructure? How were people getting around? And I mean, can you paint the picture of what Alaska was like then? And
the reason Fairbanks really existed because it was the center of a transportation system, which of course was river at that time.
Yeah.
And then dog teams in the wintertime were very, very prolific. If you read Sam White's book, he traveled all over on snowshoes and dog teams. There were many different ways, but they were all pretty cumbersome.
So when you started flying, I was asking you about the fuel because I was just reading that those OX-5 engines were really temperamental about what fuel they needed.
Well, like any aircraft engine, it had to have the high enough octane with a high compression. The reason you have high octane is not to boost the explosion, but to slow it. Because I guess you might call it diesel. When it came to top dead center, it would want to fire, and so it would ping. If a car is pinging, it's because the fuel is not a high enough octane to slow the burning. So I have a couple cases over there. It's called Stanavo, and that was the original aviation fuel. Standard Oil, California.
Did they carry fuel with them in those planes when they were doing long hauls? Like, was it Joe Crossan that did the famous flight where he was in Barrow and then he went around to Nome? How did he fuel up?
Well, there was gas at Barrow.
Yeah.
And I think there was gas at Wiseman. People like Sir Hubert Wilkins brought a lot of fuel by ship into Barrow, shipped it in for his attempts to go to the North Pole. And so there was fuel there.
Yeah. So what about maps? Did they have maps?
My dad and Eielson, it was really somebody drawing on the back of a paper sack or something.
And who would be drawing? Like a native or a doctor or something?
A trapper or a miner that walked in. But very often, and there were many cases where the customer would say, "Oh, I know the way. I walk there all the time." And then he couldn't find a place from the air because it was a totally different perspective. And that happened to my dad and others. My dad, ironically, had a photographic mind for the geography.
Yeah.
he told me many times, he said, if I ever went someplace, I never forgot it.
Mm.
And Eielson, on the other hand, was lost a lot. What helped Eielson is he hooked up with Sir Herbert Wilkins, who was a fantastic navigator.
Mm-hmm.
That combination worked, but Eielson, when he first started flying, had some problems getting lost and misplaced and so forth, just like I did when I first started flying up in the Brooks Range. There were maps, but they weren't necessarily correct. A river might go a different direction than it showed on the map. And I was not an actual navigator, and I didn't have a photographic mind. But I'll give you an example of my dad. There was an airplane, it was called a Fokker Universal, that was forced down between Fairbanks and Wiseman. And it went down about halfway and just some rolling hills. There was no mountain or bend of the river or anything, just rolling hills. It laid out there in the tundra for many, many years. And when I'd fly out that way, I'd go looking for it, and I never could find it. So my dad it was just a couple of years before he died, and I said, Pop, do you remember where that Fokker went down? He said, yeah, I do. And I said, no, I mean, really remember. You know where it is? Yeah, I do. Would you be able to find it if we went to look for it? He said, yeah. So we got in the 185. It was a different one. And we headed out, and I knew the approximate direction, go over Stevens Village on the Yukon. How am I doing? Good, just keep right on going. It was like there was a beacon there, and I had an ADF pointing at it. We arrived, and here on the side of a hillside, he said, up ahead, it's right there. I looked around, and I said, that's just one of many hillsides. I said, you sure? Yep. So I flew up to it, and I couldn't find it. I said, it's not here. He said, well, it was. And I said, you're sure? Yeah. So I got closer, and I found that when I got right on top of it, I could see it. But the wings had rotted into the tundra, and you could just see the frame. It was very hard to see. It just blew me away. He could do that. And
how old was he at that time?
70-some, you know. And he told me that, and so I never in any of his history read anything or heard from him that he got lost.
Yeah.
The only one that did was in 1925. He headed to Wiseman. I think it was 25. It was either 24 or 25. And it was a snowstorm, and so he had to turn around, and a wind up to about 50 knots got into the Yukon Valley. Well, an airplane that it flies 60 knots or 60 miles an hour, and he basically literally got blown south of Nenana. He never was lost. He knew where he was, and he went down on the Tilclat River south of Nenana because he just couldn't buck the wind.
Oh.
And then he had to walk 40 miles in the spring into Nenana, 3 days.
So it was like during breakup?
Yes, it was a breakup. And it changed his whole modus operandi on being prepared for things. But he knew how to get to Nenana. He knew where it was. But that's the only time that in all of his history, and I know most of it, that I felt he was not where he wanted to be or should have been.
But it wasn't because he didn't know where he was.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a story about him. I think he was somewhere on the North Slope or something, and no one knew where he was for weeks.
That was a Fox film expedition.
Okay. Can you tell that story?
Yes, I can.
And I know there's a side note to the story about his brother.
Yes.
I'd like to hear about that, too.
That's right. And that's an amazing story. He had that airplane, the Stinson Detroiter.
Yep.
Fox Film Company wanted to have a major movement up to Barrow to photograph the whaling, the spring whaling. So my dad did not have the lift capability, so he hired Russell Merrill out of Anchorage. Merrill Field's named after him. And he had an airplane of similar nature, except it was open cockpit. The Stinson Detroiter was a cabin airplane. It had a cabin heat, so it was more modern. And Russell Merrill was a very good pilot, ex-Navy, and had a capable airplane. But there was no snow in Fairbanks at that time, at Weeks Field, so they had to go on wheels. And I don't know what the communications was at Barrow, I don't think they had any, or they would have known that that was still winter up there. So they headed out with their first load. I think my dad had 3 people, and Russell Merrill had 2.
What airplane was Russell flying?
He was flying a Travel Air.
Okay.
It had the right J4 engine, biplane, similar performance with the Stinson Detroiter, except his was open cockpit. There was a period where pilots ordered airplanes with open cockpit when they could have been in the cabin because they felt they couldn't fly the airplane with enclosed. They wanted to feel the wind and all this kind of stuff. I mean, I'm serious. You know, Western Airlines ordered some very modern airplanes, and the pilots refused to fly from inside because they couldn't feel what's going on. But my dad said he was ready to get inside anytime, you know. But in any event.
Well, the Alaska, that's the most amazing thing to me about Alaska early aviation is the open cockpit.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, what?
Yeah.
Great.
Oh, I know. So they got forced down in the fog, which is, it's just, in the wintertime, it's unusual if you don't have it.
Mm-hmm.
But it was all snow. And there was a couple feet of snow.
And where were they?
They were on a lake, one of 1,000.
Was this on the North Slope by this point?
Yeah.
They made it over the Brooks?
Mm-hmm. When the weather cleared, Russell Merrill's airplane had smaller wheels, and he couldn't get off. And so they pulled everything into the Stinson Detroiter. My dad did get off and did make it to Barrow to pick up extra gas and a pair of skis that were left up there for the airplane. The problem is, if you've ever flown up there without a GPS, it's almost impossible to find the same lake you just left.
Oh, I can't imagine.
So many. So he was just sick about it. He flew and just could not find him. So 2 of the passengers started walking and made it to the coast, very bad shape. Russell Merrill waited a few days and then finally left. And he ate some squirrels or something, and he got pretty sick. He was found by a dog team driver at the coast and carried on into Barrow.
Wow.
And then another pilot came up and helped my dad search, and they found the airplane and got it out. But Russell Merrill was never the same after that. He was sick in Barrow for many years.
Wow, really?
Yeah, it was tragic because Russell Merrill was a fine Midwestern person and good friend of my dad.
So your dad, he wasn't in trouble. He was trying to help Russell Merrill, and he was just gone, and no one knew where he was down here, right?
Yeah.
Because there's no communication. So they're like, he could be dead or whatever.
Yep.
Who knows?
Yep. Now, while you asked about his brother Ralph, Ralph was the older brother that my dad had brought up. He had about 10 hours total time. My dad taught him how to fly, and he was a natural. And they had another airplane. It was a Waco that I think had an OX-5 in it.
Mm-hmm.
They had a mail contract. I think there were about 3 flights that would go from Fairbanks to Nome and Candle and Kotzebue and back. If they didn't make the flight, then they lost the contract. So the airline was in jeopardy. So Ralph, even though he had...
how, by the way, the mail contract was sort of the basis of the legitimacy of their outfit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, it was kind of, it was the first deal. And, mail and aviation were very synonymous.
That was probably like the second mail contract for an airplane in the territory.
I think so.
Okay.
Allison did the first one.
Yep. Okay.
Went to McGrath. So anyhow, Ralph said, well, I got an airplane and I can fly. And he had a very bad cold. I think it was borderline pneumonia. And he said, I've got to do it. But he had a harrowing flight over there. He ran into fog, and I mean, it just blows my mind. He couldn't hardly get out of that cockpit because he was so cold and numb, and they doctored him up as best they could. And his first words were, any news of Noel? And at that time, there wasn't any. When he left Fairbanks, his wife fainted because she figured I'd never see him again. And that's just another side note. But he made the whole flight. And my dad and my mom both feel that flight Ralph made was one of the most epic flights because of his total inexperience and then taking it on. Later he was killed in Kotzebue in 1930.
In a plane crash?
Mm-hmm.
It is. It almost brings tears to your eyes because he's doing his part to make this operation go.
Yep.
And it makes you realize how much work it was to have an aviation company in Alaska in those days.
Yep.
It wasn't just like, wow, they're cool pilots. No, they were like...
They were farm boys.
They were really... It was more work than you'd think.
Yep.
How many times do you think your father walked out? You mentioned the 40-mile thing.
The only one I know of was the one that he went down south of Nenana. He walked out.
And that's the one you mentioned before?
Yes. He did one night go down, and it was 40 below or so, and he wasn't equipped with the right equipment. So he walked around the airplane all night long.
Just to stay warm?
Yeah.
How did he get out of that one?
I think he was able to warm the airplane up and then fly out of where he was. I think he went down with the bad weather.
Maybe he didn't have enough fuel to keep the fire pot going all night or something.
Yeah, I don't remember the details. I'll have to reread.
Can you talk to me about the fire pots? Like the way they preheated engines and stuff. Who developed that, and can you describe it to me?
They had, and they also used, which I have, a torch. There was no butane or anything. You had the brass and a little tray on the front that you put gas in, and that heated it up, so you could torch something. Plumbers did that too, but they used the fire pot to melt the lead because they used lead to put the joints together.
And so the fuel was whatever fuel you had.
It was white. Had to be white gas.
Got it.
Because orifices would lead up with leaded gas.
And so is there open flame under there?
Yeah, it is. It is. And
that sounds fun.
Most of us had a metal plate and put on top of it to diffuse that. And you had a motor cover, and you had to be very careful because you had this roaring flame. And if the wind blew the cover into it, so a lot of airplanes were burned up in the process. Had to be very, very careful.
Something that I really found impressive reading about the search for Eielson, and before they ever left Teller, that for like the month there that they were stuck in Teller, it's talking about the mechanics going out every morning and preheating the plane.
Yep.
And doing all this, and then the wires got burned or whatever got burned, we got to fix it.
That was, I write about it in my book. And the reason I want to talk about it is I want to diverse, and this is what I do. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
What kept me and my brother alive and all the flying we did, and neither one of us, him with over 30,000 hours and me with 72 years, never had an accident. And that's pretty rare. I think what Merrill and I had, my brother Merrill and I had, was the advice and counsel of our father, who drilled into us, don't ever be pressured by anybody to fly when you don't feel comfortable for the weather or the load or the conditions. If you bring the airplane home, you've done a good day's work, whether you didn't get the job done or not. Let's look at that way. Don't be embarrassed or yield to pressure because you couldn't get through. And as a young pilot, I was pressured a lot, as my brother was, and that rang in our ears, and we said, nope, we're not going to do it.
That's incredible.
And there's many examples that I know about, but one of the most prominent was Ben Eielson. I think one of the most epic aviation events that ever happened in Alaska was when Eielson was killed over in Siberia.
I agree.
The background on that was you have to go to a fellow by the name of Olaf Swenson. And Olaf Swenson was, after the Russian Revolution, was the only American authorized to trade for furs in Siberia.
Yeah.
And in Siberia, there's a river called the Kolyma River, and it's like even bigger than the Yukon. and it went way up into central Siberia, and that was the fur trading area. All the fur traders came in there, the natives. Olaf Swenson was a very fair trader. He didn't take advantage of the natives, and so the Russians liked him, and this was after the revolution, and authorized him to trade. And he was very successful for quite a few years of using these ships. When they used ships, they weren't that big, but they were sailing ships. And they could sail up the Kolyma River to the town of Kolyma, which was the fur trading capital. But the spring of let me get this straight now, of 1929, the ship he had, called the LSF, got frozen in on the coast. It had $1 million or more furs on board, and plus a group of men. And so my dad had the only airplane capable of flying in there, and that was the Hamilton, the famous Hamilton all-metal airplane.
Wow.
He made the trip, and he and a fellow by the name of Doc Kripe. It was quite a harrowing trip. Doc Kripe had to reach out the window and unplug a vent from the oil tank. It was very risky.
And he did that several times. It wasn't that like a routine thing because they had to do it every 20 minutes?
On that flight, yeah.
Yeah. That was the first flight from North America to Asia.
Mm-hmm.
That's the incredible thing about your dad, I think, is that he just was like, oh, I'm going to go do the first thing. There's a job. I'm just going to go do that. He probably never thought.
It was a risky thing. If he'd have knocked the landing gear off or something, he'd have been out of business. So then when, what's unique about Olaf Swenson is when the ship got locked in the ice, he did not want to stay all winter in the ship.
Mm-hmm.
So he took off walking 4,000 miles through Siberia to the railhead so that he could get to Moscow.
Isn't that crazy?
I mean, it's an adventuresome book that everybody ought to read. Northwest of the World, Olaf Swenson.
So he walked 4,000, traveled.
And he went by
dog team,
reindeer, dog sleds, and then further in, horses.
But he's just kind of going along, connecting.
But he was that kind of guy. That's
crazy.
So he went out and bought another ship, and it was a whaler. Most of them were, and he named it the Nanook. So then he came back up and met the LSF when the ice broke, and they both went back up the Kolyma again to get a load of furs. And on the way out, the LSF went aground or something. Anyhow, it sank. Swenson then continued on with the Nanook and got stopped in the ice at Northeast Cape, the exact same place. So he then got a hold of Eielson, who now owned the Hamilton because their consortium owned the company.
Mm-hmm.
There was a fellow by the name of Frank Dorbant, and he became a legend because of his personality. Very aggressive, thought he was the greatest pilot in the world, would even do aerobatics with his passengers when he arrived at a village. It was that bad. He was very disliked, but he could fly an airplane. Mm-hmm. And after Eielson's group bought my dad out, Frank Dorbant came with it. So they made both Eielson and Dorbant made it to one trip to the Nanook, and they came back to Nome for a second trip. And so they headed out, and they ran into weather. A big storm came in now, and they ended up at Teller, which is on the way on the Alaska side. And the weather stayed bad for at least a week. Mm-hmm. But this brash Dorbant, unbeknownst to Eielson, and of course Dorbant worked for Eielson, but he went down and heated up his airplane and headed out. And said, "I just tired of sitting here and frustrated." Mm-hmm. And unbeknownst to Eielson heard him go and said, "Oh, geez, he's going, I'm going to look bad." This is the key. He was now under pressure to do something he did not want to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's really the crux of what's caused the accident. So Eielson and a guy by the name of Borman, his mechanic, heated up the airplane and headed out in this horrible weather. He didn't realize that Dorbank came back and said it's not fit to fly. But Eielson went all the way to the coast and was looking for a place to land in the hills out there, and in a whiteout ran into the hills and was killed in the process. And I think, and I talk about it on my book, I know of so many cases of pilots doing something that they didn't want to do and shouldn't have been doing. And I ran into that as a young pilot, pressured by powerful people going to get me fired and one thing or another. But that stuck in my head. Don't let it happen to you.
The incredible thing about that whole story to me is the rescue, or I always say this.
Yeah,
Gotta stop saying.
Yeah.
Well, they were thinking it might be a rescue. I think that's why.
Of course, yeah.
They didn't know what had happened, obviously.
To me, that flying that Crossan and Gillum did was some of the most epic flying ever done. Gillum was a cat driver and so forth and learned to fly, and he had something like 25 hours total. He talked Crossan into giving him an airplane to go join him on the search.
How do you think he did that?
The story of Gillum is a story in itself. You know, so many of them, there's a story. He was awed by people even like Noel Wien because of the weather. He just seemed to be impervious to being stopped by weather.
Sorry, you're saying that even your father was awed by him?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, having said that, my father and the others thought, he's doing it, he's good, but it might get him someday.
Of course.
They were more cautious. But I have to say, my dad, Noel Wien, was amazed at how Gillum adapted to flying in instrument weather. But they for, I think it was at least a month, with very few daylight hours, in open cockpit airplanes, 40 below, searched on the Siberian coast. And finally Crossan found him after the sun had come up a little bit and the sun shined off of the wing that was sticking up. And then there was another month of finding the bodies because they were scattered away from the airplane in deep, deep snow and so forth. So that search was of national interest. You know, it was every day that telegraphs were going out all over the world, really, because Eielson was a pretty famous guy.
And what about all of the logistical nightmare of this, of having fuel out there, and you've got these planes, and you're preheating them, and then they land? Was the Russian planes landed or something?
The Russians came later on, but they did.
And then there was another wreck at the wreck, right? Or flip over or something?
There was a couple other accidents. One of the Fokkers that the Russians had, he knocked the gear off, and they had to repair it. And then a Fairchild 71 was sent up from the East Coast. The owners of the new Alaskan Airways sent 3 Fairchild 71s, which even more modern than the Hamilton. But they both had the great Pratt & Whitney engine in them. And one of those crashed on the way to Nome, going through the Nolato Hills there, and they had the wherewithal on the airplane to repair it, and a good mechanic.
There's a video on YouTube of Hutchison telling that story about repairing that wing.
Yeah.
He said the wing was completely broke off.
Yeah. Well, it was damaged, seriously damaged.
But someone interviewed him like probably 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really
cool.
cool.
Hutch was probably one of the most noteworthy mechanics in those days. He could just do anything, and was involved in that and many other things.
Did they use like willows or something, like carving up willows and making splices?
I think he apparently had on board, anticipating either that or there was a Fairchild 71 at the site that had been damaged, and I think he had material to rebuild that.
Okay, so But the point of you talking about this is the pressure to go.
Yes, a fellow that was hired by the airline at the same time I was, went on to be a pilot, and he was flying out of Kotzebue with a Norseman on floats. And he flew the mail run up to Kobuk, to river, to the town of Kobuk.
Mm-hmm.
And there was an engineer, mining engineer there with his son that wanted to go further north in this big copper deposit that's up there. And his name was Ed Batten, and he said, no, it's the weather's not good, I just can't do it. But this engineer pressured for so long, he said, well, okay, I'll give it a try. And that was a mistake. So he headed in with the Norseman, and he didn't follow what I call a scud running procedure right. That's to leave enough room to turn, and I talk about scud running in the book, and the do's and don'ts that my mentors, taught me. And anyhow, he crashed the Norseman on floats, caught fire, and the boy got his dad out, the engineer, but Ed died in a crash. I view it as one of the basics of flying safe. Do not be pressured, and that's what my dad just pounded into us, because he had dealt with it in so many ways. He outlived them all,
And I think that for me, as someone that just flies for fun, sometimes I pressure myself, but I really want to do this.
Get home-itis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You talk about your scud running basics.
Mm-hmm.
I think people should read the book and read that and digest it. But could you give us a summary of the scud running basics?
Well, yeah, and it's pretty simple. When the weather's down, you're flying through the valleys, following the rivers or whatever to get from A to B. And when I was pretty young, we were flying the mail, and there was a lot of pressure to get the mail through. The post office didn't like it was stacking up, and what's the problem? And we're running out of room, and you got to go.
Yeah. By the way, scud running is you're flying just above the treetops or just
underneath the overcast.
Underneath the overcast.
Yeah. And going through the valleys. And going through a valley is very key, because let's say you're going through the valley and it getting lower and lower, and now it's time to turn. If you're in the center of the valley, because it's the lowest, you've only got half the valley to turn. Mm-hmm. And so one of the basics is when you are going up the valley, fly on one side or the other, so that when you have to turn, you have the full ability to do it. And the other part of it is going through a cut. You're going to go from one river deal through this saddle, and you're going to get into there. You approach that saddle. Well, first off, you don't go through it unless you can see to the other side. And you don't go through it if the wind is blowing to create a downdraft. So you're up below the overcast. You only have so much room to get through that valley, and you get to it, you get a downdraft, you're going to hit it. Many cases of it. Mm-hmm. So the basic key to it, which one of the pilots taught me, come at it at a 45-degree angle, work along, usually to the right so you can turn to the left, and work your way until you can see over and you can get through. And then you can't, you're only turning so far. You're not turning 180 degrees, and yeah. I can't tell you how many times I did that day after day in the scud running, and I got away with it. Mm-hmm. But I can't tell you how many pilots were stacked up in those valleys. Mm. Those are just some of the few that I've talked about in my book. And I think they're significant.
So when you're coming into a saddle like that, it's like you want to leave all your options open. You don't want to commit. I mean, and that's really the thing is, like, stop committing to stuff.
There can't be, I think I can make it. You got to know you can make it.
Yeah.
Or you're going to die. And they're just...
At some point, it's going to...
Hundreds of pilots through the years that have crashed in that situation. I think if you follow some of those basic rules and you're scud running, you're okay. Mm. There's nothing wrong with scud running unless you don't respect it and follow some of those basic rules. And I have to say, I learned from people like my dad, and I wish that somehow this could be emphasized to these young pilots. They get their private or their license, and if they don't get the kind of advice and counsel I did, they're at risk. It always kind of breaks my heart when I hear about these accidents. It just should not be happening. The thing I'm so proud of my dad about, he was Mr. Safety Conscious. He really was. And they call him the cautious dean. And I think that's very appropriate for him, and I'm very proud of him of that.
I've always felt like reading the story about the Ellison wreck and the search and everything. I always thought, like, man, if he would have been in the state at that time, the outcome of all this would have been different.
You don't have to imagine what the stress level was.
Totally.
Every time you take off, it was like going to the moon.
Yeah.
Because there was nobody to come look for you, and no place set up to land. You had to find it. The equipment was rudimentary, and engine failures were fairly common. It's almost like you're in World War II, except you're not getting shot at, but you're risking your life every day.
Yeah.
I think my mom was a great influence. They'd never had a honeymoon, and I think my brother was going to be born, so they went back to Minnesota.
Yeah.
And the pressure on him was huge, and he sold out.
Yeah.
As did other people.
So he'd been flying for 6 years, basically.
Yeah.
And he was done. Was your father well off at any point in his life?
Yeah, I would say when he came back to Alaska, and he and Ralph and started the airline all over again, there was a period around 1940 where he had quite a fleet of airplanes and pilots, but that was short-lived because of the accidents he had. He lost a pilot that was married in their home to the office manager, and 2 weeks later he spun in a snowstorm over Wakefield and crashed. He didn't have the instrument capability. I was about 5 years old, and I remember him taking me out to see I have a vivid memory of us going out to see the wreck.
Wow.
Unfortunately. And then he lost, he had a fleet of Cessna Airmasters. They were smaller, fairly fast. But there again, low-time pilots, usually snowstorm, pushing the weather. And he lost 4 pilots in 1 year. And
wow.
I was chief bush pilot for Wien Airlines for quite a few years, and we had in the under 12.5, the bush we called it, we had many accidents because of the type of flying we were doing.
Yeah.
And I talk about it in my book that I was no sooner asked by my uncle to be chief bush pilot. The FAA started looking at the Wien file. They sent a blue ribbon team up to Fairbanks. A guy whose name was Prokop, I'll never forget him. He was a nice fellow and well-intentioned. And he said, we've looked at your accidents, and they're pretty alarming. And I said, yes, they are. And he said, we're either here, we're from Minneapolis, so we're used to winter flying, but it's a whole lot different in Fairbanks, Alaska. And we're either here to fix you or shut you down. And Dick King, the chief pilot, who I had he was my boss, great admiration for. We talked it over, and we agreed that we need to take a very proactive approach to it, admit we have a problem, and we also admitted that we needed some help. But a lot of our accidents were just landing gear failures. The Cessna 180, there's a world of difference between a Cessna 180 and a 185. The landing gear box on the 180 was pretty weak for the heavy loads. We were loading heavy always. We had to get the mail out, and rough drifty conditions and so forth. We probably had a couple of landing gear failures a year where they had to be rebuilt until the 185 came, and then we never had another gearbox like this airplane. But so what we did is they said, look, we hear you. We're going to fully cooperate, but would you go out into our system before we talk further?
Go check out the field.
Yeah. And that was Nome. Places where we had airplane space would be Nome, Kotzebue, Barrow, Fort Yukon, Bellows. And so each one went to a place. It was the spring of the year, muddy fields, some places no field, no airport. And we were flying Norseman's 180s, Beech 18s, which is a very prone accident airplane because of what a hot airplane it was and the type of flying we were doing with it on the dew line and that type of thing.
What is a dew line?
Distant early warning line.
Okay.
We had the contract to service that.
Okay.
That was radar stations all across into Canada and so.
Got it.
So they did, and they came back, and they were a different group. I forget exactly his words, but he said, we are very impressed with what we saw. We're amazed at the mission you have, the job you have to do, and what you have to do with it. What can we do to help? And I said, we happen to have a gate over FAA guy here that was going to try to make a name for himself and shape up Wien Airlines by regulating the heck out of everything we did. And he was a hindrance to us instead of a help. But one of the things that would happen, particularly at Nome, an airplane would take off in the morning and the weather would be good, and in the afternoon it would blow in, and you're down in a whiteout trying to get home. And if an airliner came in, either Alaska or Wien, the big ones, they're shooting an approach, they had precedence for the area, and you had to stay out of it. And I remember there was one fellow by the name of Art Johnson. He was a 10,000-hour pilot, and he was told to hold outside over the ice, and flew into the ice and crashed and killed him and a gal, I think, and a baby. And one of our pilots were very upset that I had to make the rule, because it wasn't legal for them to do instrument approaches. So I requested what we called I'm trying to think of the name of it, but when they came in, if they needed to, they could shoot an instrument approach. If they had an instrument rating, the airplane was equipped and so forth, which we did. And they said, you got it. We got the authority for the IFR approaches, and they transferred the FA guy out of here. For me, a young guy, that was very stressful. And the problem with, and this is in my book very extensively, how do you find a pilot that isn't going to wreck an airplane and hire him off the street?
Right. And to do that kind of work,
Yeah.
especially.
Because of all the nuances of the job, the pressure on them. I did everything I could to learn about them, flew with them a lot, and even drove in a car to see. Sometimes the way a person drives a car might say, this guy has got his stuff together.
I think that's very interesting.
Yeah.
I never thought of that before.
But what I came up with a conclusion, and I think this is very, very significant. In Wien Airlines, we had two categories of flying. One was over 12.5, under 12.5. 121 versus 135, different rules. We never had a fatal accident in all the history of the airline in the over 12.5, 2 pilots. We had many in the under 12.5, 1 pilot.
What do you mean? One pilot operation. Okay.
Yeah. We hired guys off the street like ex-Air America guys, and they were hot dogs and no discipline whatsoever. Pilots would come to us and say, I don't want to fly with that guy. So we started hiring young guys, maybe 300 hours, had them in the right seat maybe for 2 or 3 years, and we trained them ourselves, and they were the best pilots we had. We never had an incident in about 5 years, about 5,000 hours a year, flying on the North Slope. If you look at the airline industry, it's a phenomenal story.
Yeah.
We went, 20 years or something like that without an airline accident. Think about over Chicago stacked up in New York and everything.
Oh, it's crazy.
And what's the difference? 2 pilots.
And why do you think that is?
Well, because you don't know a pilot till you get to know them. And the only way you get to know them is you have them. You got simulators.
Flying with them.
Yeah, and the captains will when we did with Wien, whenever anybody was upgraded to a captain, you reviewed all the captains flying with them when they were co-pilots. Did they have the stuff in them?
Okay, so I get what you're saying. It's not that there's 2 people in the cockpit and so it's a safer flight. It's that person has flown a lot of hours with another person.
You know what you got. You know what you got. You know how he thinks. You know how he reacts.
Yeah. So in a 185, you hire people and you might fly a couple flights with them and then let them go. And so now you don't know what decision-making, bad habits they're building out there, any of that. Got it. Got it.
It's very, very significant.
That is significant.
I resolved when I was in business, I would never run an operation again that didn't have 2 pilots.
So what can someone like me do with that? I just want to be a safer pilot when I'm flying around. You know, I don't have commercial aspirations, but how can I apply that principle myself?
I'm fortunate. I grew up in a family airline on Weeks Field, and I observed and I had mentors. And that mentoring has kept me alive. And but the average pilot just doesn't have it. And sometimes they're very smart people, doctors and lawyers and everything. And they're pretty smart people, and they think, well, if Richard Wien can do it, I can do it. And that doesn't make me some super pilot.
No, but they can't do it while also being a really, really successful lawyer.
Yep.
Because it's just, you got to have the bandwidth, and you need to go out and be a professional at flying as well. Yeah.
I don't know the answer. I do know, I'll use Bering Air as an example. They do it right. You ask, how do you do it? They have the Caravans. That's a single pilot airplane. But what do? They do not want that pilot to be in the left seat until they know everything about him. And so they fly 2 pilots in a Caravan. That costs them some money.
That's just training. It's essentially just training.
It's exactly what I'm talking about, is they observe this guy enough to know what they got. And there's no other way to do it.
Yeah. Let's take a little break, and then I want to ask you about your mentors. I want to talk to you today about something that is very concerning involving the fleet of small aircraft that we have today. What if I told you that someone had done a structural repair on your aircraft, had never told you, your mechanic did not know about it, and it was not logged in your logbooks? Now, of course, as a seat upholstery guy, I'm talking about something relating to the seats of your aircraft. If you have a Cessna aircraft, one of the old 180s or early 172, that airplane is nearly 70 years old. And a lot of those seats have never been upholstered. But here's the other thing. The ones that have been upholstered, a lot of times, the mechanic and the owner never inspected the seat frame. You may think, well, how is this possible? What happens is owners of aircraft, they take their seats out of the airplane and they take it to an upholstery shop and they say, here, reupholster my seats. And here's a guy that normally does boats and couches and furniture. But a lot of times they tear the old upholstery shop off, and guess what? They find damage in there. Damage that the owner didn't know about because it was covered by upholstery. And they repair it because they're trying to get the job done and get it out the door. And so the owner shows up 3 weeks later and picks up their beautiful seats, puts them in the airplane, goes flying. This sounds like a crazy scenario, but is definitely a scenario that happens way more than you would think. Now, why do they never get inspected? Is it because of mechanic neglect? Not necessarily. We all know about the Cessna seat rail AD. That AD was created because the seats were sliding back on the seat rails at the most inopportune time. That has killed multiple people. But that AD does not cover Piper seats, which could have the same issue, and it doesn't cover other parts of the seat frame. It only covers the part of the seat frame that attaches to the seat rail and the seat rail itself. But there are a lot of structural components to that seat that never get inspected. The problem is that most upholstery completely covers the seat frame. It covers parts of the seat frame that should never be obscured. For example, where the backrest pivots to the frame. That is a very critical point, and in a lot of seats, it's completely covered up by the upholstery. I'm going to show you some examples of this, and then I want to talk about the solution. Okay, this first one is kind of just for fun because it's so extreme. This is the most outrageous example I have of what is your upholstery hiding. A customer literally brought me this seat and wanted me to upholster it. And once I tore the old upholstery off, this is what I found. This is another example of what is your upholstery hiding. Obviously, this frame has since been cannibalized, but as you can see, the frame broke right here. If there was upholstery on this frame, you obviously wouldn't be able to see this. But if it had all its legs and it was attached to the seat rail, you would be able to rock the back rest of this and it would not move because it's secured to the seat rail. But this break would cause there to be stress in other parts of the frame. And let me show you one other one. One of the most common breaks that I see is when holes have been drilled on the front side of a seat frame and then they put screws, sheet metal screws into it to hold on like a plate or something. And as you can see, if it's on the front of the seat frame, that is going to crack like 100%. So imagine your seat's broke in that way, and now you have extra stress on where these holes are. It could all lead to something catastrophic. I want to talk to you about the way upholstery should be done. You should have your mechanic strip the frames, inspect the frames, repair the frames, and then paint them and ready them for the new upholstery. And then your mechanic should be the one installing the new upholstery, or you with your mechanic's approval and supervision. And that is where we come in. We make seat upholstery kits that are so easy to install that literally anyone with any skill level can do it in 5 to 10 minutes per seat. In addition to being easy to install, it eliminates the problem of future inspection. Number one, the upholstery does not cover up critical parts of the frame that should be inspected regularly. I'm talking like pre-flight regularly. Number two, it is so easy to remove and reinstall the upholstery without damaging the upholstery because of how our system works, that a mechanic can take the seat upholstery off while the seat is still in the airplane and put it back on in 5 to 10 minutes. Go to SportAircraftSeats.com. You can design and order your seats right there. We have a library of installation and instructional videos, and every order you place helps support future episodes of the Coffee and a Hanger podcast. Let's get back to the podcast. Okay, I want to get into your mentors, but like something that when I first started talking to you, I found very fascinating was that you had met Harold Gillum, or you knew Harold Gillum, you knew Joe Crossan, you knew all these early guys. Can you describe like any memories you had of Harold Gillum?
Well, as a young person, he had deep eyebrows and he was a very handsome fellow, but he had a face that might be a little scary to a young person.
Really?
Because of the deep eyebrows, you know. And the other thing I remember about him is everybody talking about him because of the weather he flew, including my dad.
So this isn't just something that sort of history has, the books have sort of exaggerated. He really was incredible in weather.
I mean, flying in weather is not a big deal, except it was then because you didn't have GPS, or I don't know if he even had an artificial horizon. It might have been just a turn ball. I've known pilots like him, and they usually died. But Harold was, he had an innate ability. One story my dad told about him was he took a contract with the Weather Bureau to fly up to, I forget what it was, 10,000 feet every day, no matter what the weather, and take readings or something like that. And it happened at Weeksfield, and my dad talked about it. And he never missed a day, no matter whether it's snowing.
For how many days? Like a couple months or something.
Yeah, but I remember my dad focusing on this contract he had, that he flew up, took weather observations, and came down every day, no matter what the weather.
That is nuts.
And how did he do that, you know? And he used to take off for Anchorage, you know, and I don't know if he even checked weather. And you know, you got McKinley out there, and you had to know where you were, but he had an uncanny ability to be. He wasn't fearful; he was fearless. In a different environment where there were more established rules, he probably could have lasted well and taught a lot of people, you know, that type of thing. But his was kind of reckless.
Mm-hmm.
It was reckless, but he seemed to be able to do it. And I think it's appropriate to say that it wasn't necessarily weather that killed him. It was a mechanical thing. Mm-hmm. And he had he was a mechanic. He was used to being on Caterpillars and things like that. And apparently he had a fuel line that was cracked or broke. Mm-hmm. And instead of replacing it, he patched it. And he patched it with some material, and they used to use it to solidify things. It was a glass type thing where you mixed it and then it solidified, and it was used for patching things. So he was coming up through Canada, very bad weather, IFR, intimate roads, you know. And he was over Boca de Quadra down in south of Ketchikan, and that line broke. And the engine quit. So now he couldn't maintain altitude. He had a heavy loaded airplane, iced up, and he hit the ground. And I think somebody died, but others lived. There was a young girl, I think, on there that died at the site. And he lived, and he died because he walked from the site to the coast, and probably was in shock and so forth. And they found him dead at the coast. But so you might say that it wasn't necessarily weather that killed him, but really it had been a better day. He might have been able to go on one engine and get to someplace. But
yeah, yeah. I mean,
Harold was definitely a phenomenon. I mean, definitely a phenomenon. But that's what he was noted for.
What about some of the other early guys that you met that hadn't died yet when you came along?
Oh, there were some characters like Archie Ferguson.
Can you tell me one story about him?
Well, there's a lot.
Yeah.
He called in and they said, is this an emergency? He says, Christ, every time I'm in the air, it's an emergency. He always talked on the radio, yelled on the radio. And
I heard he would do like a radio show on the radio.
Yeah, almost, yeah. A funny story, Archie had this huge laugh. His folks lived on the Kobuk. He came in one day and landed downwind. And he said he had a hell of a time getting it on the ground and everything. And he came in and he said, Ma, every time I fly over, you got to make smoke. Then I can tell which way the wind's blowing. So he came in one day and sure enough, out came the smoke. And Archie comes in, and his dad was there, and his mom said, where are my pants? I can't find my pants. She said, oh, when Archie flew over, I threw him in the stove so it'd make stove. And he had this huge laugh. I've got to get that digitized.
Oh, man.
I don't know where I can do it, but I've got it set aside to do that.
So he was like not a natural pilot at all? He like really struggled flying to learn to fly and stuff.
You know, I never flew with him, but he must have had some ability. He was just his life was that way. He was in more businesses and
he had like a couple of wives and different.
Oh yeah, several kids. But he had a tug and barge operation. He was quite an entrepreneur, but not very sophisticated. You know, just a genuine character.
How did your dad like him? I mean, did he tolerate him? Or?
Oh yeah.
He didn't annoy him.
Oh, they were good friends. I mean, he was. You couldn't help but like Archie. You know, he had that personality.
There was another guy that I was reading about, Ed Young, and A. Bennett.
A. Bennett was kind of a nemesis of my dad.
Okay.
My dad in 25 had brought his brother Ralph, who was a good mechanic. Mm-hmm. A. Bennett came, and he convinced Rodabaugh that he would get up earlier, fly longer hours. He could do everything Noel Wien was doing and maintain the airplanes.
All by himself.
Yeah. And that's when my dad had an engine failure and landed on Wickersham Dome because Ralph was not maintaining the airplane and the water pump was leaking and blew. And so he was forced down. And after that, my dad quit. He didn't like that.
And then is that when he went outside?
Mm-hmm. Bennett was kind of a bully, and my dad was not of the nature to deal with that.
Yeah.
He was uncomfortable with that relationship. Mm-hmm. But Bennett then and Rodabaugh formed a company called Bennett Rodabaugh, and they expanded quite a bit. But my dad then came back from Minnesota. Ralph had stayed up here, and my dad left.
Okay.
So they were anxious to get back in business together again. And so they talked Rodabaugh, and I guess Bennett, into selling them that Hissel Standard right there.
Got it.
And it was pretty tired. The fabric and the engine was wore out, and they stuck it to him, but they raised enough money, but the proviso was you could not fly out of Fairbanks and compete with him. So Ralph overhauled the engine and patched it up, and they flew it to Nome. And that was really the official start of Wien Alaska Airlines.
And what year did they start that?
1927.
Got it.
He did, with this old decrepit airplane, did a ton of flying out of the Siberian Peninsula there because the miners were he had all the business. I mean, they would line up every day to go someplace and do something.
Okay, so as far as your flying mentors, who are your main mentors for flying? You mentioned that you had a lot of people that really helped you.
Well, yeah, there were guys that I really respected.
Yeah.
They were just exceptional pilots.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, my dad, I've talked a lot about him and how I think he kept me alive as a kid to be flying like I did, the do's and don'ts. My brother, very patient with me. And
your brother, you count your brother as one of your mentors?
Yes, definitely.
And he's 5 years older than you?
Mm-hmm. Sam White, not only in aviation, but just in life in general. He was one of the most principled person I have ever known.
Who was Sam White?
And right was right and wrong was wrong. In fact, he had to leave as fish and wildlife agent, the flying fish and wildlife agent, because when the military came up here, they asked for special privileges and were given them over and above the civilians. And Sam did not like that.
Special hunting privileges?
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me who Sam White was? Just like...
Well, Sam was...
What was he most famous for?
Sam was grew up in Maine.
Mm-hmm.
Was a teenager. He started guiding people. He was a woodsman, a giant of a man. I call him a giant of a man, and I wrote the preface to his book, and he became very a part of our family.
Okay.
We lived across the street from him. He loved and idolized my dad and my Uncle Ralph. But he ended up in Alaska on the Boundary Commission and surveying, and so he walked all over interior Alaska.
When you say he walked, we're talking hundreds of mile trips?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Winter,
very comfortable
summer?
In the woods.
Winter and summer, or just summer? How?
Well, later on he became the fish and wildlife agent, and then he snowshoed and dog teamed all over. He was required to go to Fort Yukon, for instance, and tag the beavers. You couldn't sell your beaver hide unless it had been tagged by Fish and Wildlife in those days. They really started, for the first time, there was game management through Sam White. Mm-hmm. But he was very good with the natives in that he taught them how you want to leave enough beaver so there's enough for next year instead of wiping them out. And over time, I think he gained the respect for him. Some people didn't like him because he was the law, and they weren't used to that. But he was just quite a woodsman, and he tells the story about heading to Fort Yukon to go tag the beaver, and he sees his airplane fly over, and a couple hours later he sees it fly back again. He said, what's wrong with this picture? I'm down here slaying it out with a dog team. He hated dog teams and dogs. Lots of times he just took a pack and snowshoed. So when he left, my dad and Uncle Ralph taught him to fly. He bought his own airplane, bought his own fuel. The federal government refused to fund him, but he did it anyway. And over time, he convinced them that this was the way to go for game management. You could get out and do more of it, but it was a long, talk about pioneer, and he was. And so when he left the Fish and Wildlife because he was unhappy, my dad put him to work as a bush pilot.
So you're saying he was the first fish and wildlife agent that flew?
Ever, anywhere.
In the world?
As far as we know.
Yeah.
He's noted for that.
He must have been a man of many talents, because you were talking about how he made these stoves. My friend makes Arctic oven tents, and they sell the little stoves.
His were very lightweight.
Was he the inventor of that? Or, I mean, I kind of get the idea that
well, he didn't invent a stove in a tent, but he perfected it to a degree to be light enough you could carry it in an airplane. We all carried them in a tent. If you go down at 40 below in an airplane and your passengers aren't dressed for it, like my dad said, guess where they're going to get their clothes? From you. You're not going to let them die. And so here, with just a simple tent and stove, you can survive. He used to use it if the weather was bad. Instead of turning around, he'd just land and pitch a tent, and it was snug as a bug. He'd rather be in that little tent than he would the finest hotel in New York, you know. I mean, truly, that's the way he was.
Yeah.
But there were so many ways that he affected so many young people. Not only my brother and I, but others, because he was so principled. What's right and what's wrong. I mean, he wouldn't survive today.
Let's move on to some other questions, because I got a lot of other questions for you. Last night, I told you the story about my ski flying mistakes and misjudgment, and you started telling me some glacier landing rules, and I thought, I want you to tell me about this on the podcast.
Merrill did more glacier flying than I did. He did quite a bit on Kahiltna, which is the main one, you know, out of Talkeetna. Later, Merrill wasn't doing it, and Carl Benson called me, and he said, I can't find anybody to take our people up there. Would you do it? So I talked to Merrill about it, and I said, give me some basics. And one of the things that was important is your altimeter setting, because you need to know at what altitude you're going to touch down so that you can set up your pattern, your base leg, and everything. And what he recommended, he says, come back around and dive down in there and get as close to where you're going to land as you can and look at your altimeter. If it's at 7,000 feet or 7,500 or whatever, even though it wasn't the right barometric pressure, it was relative, you knew it was. So then when you come around to land, because it's so steep, you didn't want to be down too low because you couldn't outclimb it. And you go into these crevices in the bottom. So the procedure was, which I learned to do and did quite a bit of, is go down, set the altimeter, then come around, do a downwind leg and a base leg, and set your base leg 500 feet above where you expect to touch down. And then you become a kind of a visual ILS in that I'm so far out, this is the altitude I ought to be. Because there's no other way. There's no glide path. And if you were too low, you were done. You can't climb out of there.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the do's and don'ts.
So in other words, there's no horizon, because the side of the valley just kind of goes up. You don't know where you're at.
Yeah, that's right.
And so you're just flying it into the ground blind, essentially.
But it's so simple.
Yeah.
It's like he described and I did quite a bit of. And the other thing, so you would touch down and you immediately open the throttle wide open and climb up the glacier and then turn 90 degrees so you wouldn't slide down. And you had to shut the fuel off to one tank so it wouldn't all drain out the other tank, things like that. The other thing, that particular glacier was not only steep, it was on a bias. And this is what's so important. You're up there and you're 90 degrees and you turn around, you're heading down and you're going down like this. Well, your airplane wants to slide this way in addition to that way. And particularly with ski wheels, that would knife in and you could flip over. That's happened before.
It would knife in?
Yeah. Well, the ski, it's like this. The ski's going to want to slide that way as much as that way. And that cuts in to the snow. And Merrill actually had an experience with that with a so-called mountain pilot in Colorado. It was on the front page of Flying Magazine. And everybody said, oh, Merrill, you need to fly with this guy. He's a mountain pilot down here. And the guy offered to take him up in the mountain. Worst mistake he ever made.
Yeah.
They landed up there and just buried a thing in the snow. Didn't know what he was doing.
Didn't he find out that the guy had...
No, he had
no time at all.
Yeah, thought he did. But they dug it out once, and then if the pilot, after they dug it out, said, Merrill, you do it, he'd have floated out of there. Because what you have to do, if you think about it, when you're dealing with a slope, you just go around. You make an arc. And it's the same thing as being straight going down. Your skis are both firmly on tracking around. You know, if you're landing on a beach.
Kind of like driving on a racetrack.
It's the same thing.
Okay.
Same thing. I never had a situation where I felt I'm scared or this isn't going good because of the basic rules of it. The basic problem was a problem if you had the fog rolled in or something like that, which I've had to deal with, and so did Merrill. Climb out on the gauges and hold your heading to get out of there. But it was.
You recommend doing that? Taking off into fog and
had to. Just hold your heading. Had to get out. I didn't like it. I never did it again after I did it. Merrill did some of that too. But you know, if you got the gyro and you hold your heading, and you don't have a crosswind, you can do it, get away with it. But it usually wasn't solid or something. It was just a moment where you had to do that. But
why don't we talk a little bit about what was the difficulty of getting into aviation for your father?
Yeah, my dad, from the day one, he was one of those that became very enamored with aviation, anything mechanical.
Yeah.
He had to walk, I think, a mile to get to this flight school. And he kept observing him. And finally, I think this Major Miller came over to him and, would you like to go for a ride? And he said, yes, I would. Do you have any money? Yes, I do. And he went up and did everything he could to make him airsick. And my dad loved every minute of it and was hooked.
Yeah.
And then in his book, he says he paid $40 an hour for 8 hours of flying.
Yeah.
Which still blows my mind because I don't know how much money that would be today. I assume it's accurate because that book was researched from one end to the other.
Yeah.
So he got the 8 hours in, and I think Major Miller was pretty impressed with him.
Can you talk about how much he was making working on the road crew and stuff?
Well, it was dollars per day, but I don't remember.
Yeah.
I think a truck driver, he started raking rocks or something like that. And how he got to where he would have 8 times 400, I don't know.
Yeah.
But
8 times 40.
In his book, he said he charged him, it was $40, I think, for 15 minutes a day, for 15 minutes of flight. I think that's...
Yeah, it was a lot.
Maybe it was more than that.
I think it was 40. I mean, I just read this
morning. It
morning.
might have been an hour, but
I think it was $40 an hour.
I think it was.
But I mean, when I got my pilot's license 6 years ago, I paid a guy, and it was $50 an hour. He was, I'll just do it for $50 an hour. And so really with my fuel on that airplane that I owned, it was $70. So really, that was a lot. And I guess what I was wondering is, it seemed like the World War I guys kind of got into aviation without owning their own expense. And they were kind of hanging around, and some of them were barnstorming. But the people that wanted to get in after World War I had they had to be motivated.
Yes, definitely. You know, other than barnstorming, this is before the mail runs and everything else. There wasn't a lot of money in that, and that's why so many didn't get into it. They could make more money being a banker or somebody else.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because we mentioned this yesterday about that sort of in the lower 48, they were still trying to figure out what's the usefulness of aviation. Like, we're going to go around and entertain people, but it was more of showing people, look, there's an airplane and we can fly it. But there's no useful need being filled.
Yeah.
When Ellison and your father show up in Alaska, suddenly Alaska's prime. Can you talk about that?
Alaska had a use for the airplane more than any other state because they didn't have the roads, the railroads, and commerce was very difficult, either dog sled or riverboat or walking. And so all of a sudden, you look at the published fares. I have one here somewhere, and it shows. This was Bennett Rodabaugh I told you about, and it would be like $500 to Nome, or $400 to Kotzebue or something. These are big dollars.
Yeah.
Way over
the cost of a dog sled run.
I mean, way over the scale in the South 48.
Yeah.
But back to his flying, he got the 8 hours in, but he had to come up with a bond for the airplane before he could solo it, fly by himself.
Yeah.
But as Colonel Miller put him in contact with an ex-Navy pilot who had bought a Jenny, and he and his wife were going to tour and give rides and barnstorm, and he could come along. I don't think he got paid. It was like maybe they picked up his food tab or something. Came to a little town, and the pilot had trouble finding a field big enough to land in, and that's what they did. They looked for a farmer's field to land in, and the only one there was pretty short, but he had to get in, and he made several passes, and he hadn't picked up, and sometimes when you're flying an airplane, maybe you can't notice what the wind's doing, but my dad noticed he was coming in downwind, and he came around again, and my dad determined this time, you could just tell he was determined to land. He was going to wreck the airplane. And I mean, he was like halfway down the runway trying to get it on because he had tailwind. So my dad pushed the throttle forward and pulled the stick back and climbed out. He knew he'd probably be in trouble, but he didn't want to see the airplane wrecked.
Yeah.
He turned around to, apologize or whatever, and the pilot said, "Your airplane." And he came around and landed in the wind and plunked it right in there. So he was very grateful, the owner. And from then on, he let him do half the flying. And that's really how he ultimately sold it.
You ever heard, that's an incredible story. You ever heard the story about Mudhole Smith trying to get into aviation?
I've read his book a couple times, and I can't remember too much of it now, but...
Well, he basically, it was just an absolute struggle.
Yeah.
He was trying to, same thing, bunch of guys that flew in the war were hanging around, and he was trying to go. Of course, he was later. I think he came up here just before the war, right?
Yeah, I think so. Uh-huh.
But, just a difficult thing, and just how much more they had to go through than we do. We were talking a little bit about that, and you had mentioned about being 22 and being asked to do things, and I'm 22, and oh, come on, you can do it. And I was thinking about the fact that your dad was only 24 when he showed up in Anchorage, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he's like really young. And you say, well, he already had a lot of experience. And I think he did have comparatively.
He did. He had
but you would
almost 600 hours.
That people would consider that, very low time pilot nowadays.
It's high time then.
Yeah.
A lot of guys came up here with 200 or 300 hours
Hmm.
and didn't make it.
To send a 22-year-old kid nowadays out in a Super Cub and have him fly to Nome, having never done it before, is kind of like, whoa. And then as a 24-year-old guy flying places that no one's literally ever flown. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I even though he's my dad and I've heard the story so many times, I'm still blown away by it. I mean, as I use the saying that those people that have done things appreciate people who have done things. And I've done enough flying with modern aircraft to know what it had to be with those contraptions. And it's just, I think it wasn't he didn't know any better. He had a fairly modern airplane for his day when he was staying up here, which was the Hissel Standard, 150 horse biplane and bigger landing gear. He probably felt, hey, this is what I needed and I can do it. But we've talked quite a bit about what makes people do things. And it wasn't only Noel Wien, it was Joe Crossan and Harold Gillum and Russell Merrill, and all of them were, in those early days, pushing the elements, and good chance you're not going to come home. And it does cause me to think about that. And I guess in his case, it was part of his demeanor. He was very calculating. And I don't think I've ever really, I talked to him a lot. I wish I'd have talked to him more about what he did and why. But I didn't get into the psychological side of it. Why did you do that? And I can only assume that he wanted to fly, and here finally was an opportunity to fly and get paid for it, rather than working for food. And
because what were they making as barnstormers?
Oh, barely enough to buy the gas, because they were so competitive. Sometimes if you went to the city, it was big enough and they'd come, but some of them had already seen their first airplane. And then the other, how do you collect the money? They could stand outside and look up and see it happening anyhow. I was not did you ever see the movie Waldo Pepper? Oh, you ought to see that. That's a classic. It's a characterization of these guys and what they went through, what they did. I took my dad to it. He just laughed through the whole thing. And I said, was that everywhere in it, Pop? He said, yes, exactly what we did.
That's interesting. I'll have to check that out.
Did anything to get a buck,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the type of things they were doing, it's like, it's not enough to just fly through the air, though you got to do loops and all those things, and then we'll strap a woman to the wing. What? They
had to play auto polo. They had Model Ts stripped down, and they had a hoop on, and so the guy would stand on the side with the mallet. And they played polo, but they purposely rolled him over. My dad didn't like that kind of stuff. And he refused to drive the motorcycle. He said too many guys got hurt.
And this is part of the Barnstorming show?
Flying circus.
Yeah. Yeah, they were really they're grasping at straws to try to figure out what to do with aviation, which is crazy to think about, because nowadays it's like, to me, it's obvious. But I think that it's because we're in Alaska. Can you talk a little bit about the airline business? I mean, even once he came up, it wasn't easy.
Well, no, because it was the first.
Yeah.
Eielson, there's no question. You have to give credit to Eielson as the visionary and the first. He stimulated. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Eielson, because he stimulated aviation to the point where my dad did come up and married the Nome girl, But I think one of the things we were talking about was everything's kind of relative. when you've experienced hardship, not enough money to eat, and to be able to come up here and make like $500 a month. And I don't know initially whether he made that much. It might have been 300, but still,
Yeah.
that was top wages. And he was doing something he loved to do.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether I think his nature was such that he was cautious, of course. We talked about that a lot. And was just determined he wasn't going to crash. But everywhere he went, he had to find a place to land, a mountaintop, a river bar, or something. And with that particular airplane, he was able to do it. But I never had the conversation that we're having now. What I think there's no question. What was the alternative to what he was doing? Where can he get a job, and how much he's going to get paid for?
Yeah.
Everybody's looking for work, and to come up here and make big money, it was worth the risk, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think a lot of it was because of his demeanor too. But as we've talked, the real pioneers, in my estimation, were the first: Eielson, Noel Wien, Ralph Wien, Joe Crossan, Harold Gillum to some degree, and there's several, Russell Merrill out of Anchorage. And then later on, you had another degree of pioneer. Let's take Bob Reeve, for instance.
Yeah.
He came around 1930. He'd been flying in Latin America, had quite a bit of money.
Yeah.
Tri-Mode Force. But he tackled the toughest environment in the territory, which was the Aleutians. And you have to give him credit as pioneering there.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the other guys that really had been done before, starting to get airports and maps and the equipment was key.
Yeah. So when your father came up, engines weren't reliable.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't figure out the Arctic cold flying yet, really.
No.
Zero places to land that were improved.
Mm-hmm.
There was how many runways? Zero, right?
Zero. Mm-hmm.
There was Weeks Field, but that was a racetrack.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So hundreds of miles between destinations of completely unimproved wilderness.
Mm-hmm.
That is just, it's so mind-boggling.
Yeah. They just celebrated Merrill Field, the history of it, which is appropriate.
Yeah.
As the first airport.
Really?
Yeah. Alaska's first airport, that's the headlines.
Is that true?
Well, it depends upon what you classify as an airport. It was no more of an airport than Weeks Field was. It was a golf course. But they did refine it pretty fast, and it expanded, and that's where Reeve and all the others ended up.
Yeah, I kind of feel like that's not, I mean, it's like, well, the first airport, but isn't the first airport the first place there was a airplane flight? You know,
I think they called it the first certified airport.
Okay.
That might be true.
Yeah, there you go.
Might be true.
How many runways did your dad build, because didn't he end up building runways in all these places?
The airline did later on.
This is between when he arrived in 24 and the war, because when the war came, all these runways started getting built, right?
Yeah, but they were military runways.
Right.
That would be Northway in Alaska, Tanna, Santa Cross, Ladd, Galena, and Nome. They were all same hangars and everything else. As far as the bush airports, when I first started flying for the airline, we served communities. About half of the communities we served did not have an airport. We either landed on the river or on skis on the river or something like that.
Yeah.
But the airline went on a period of building airports. And I think they negotiated that with the government. And we had a guy that drove a cat. And places like Venati, Arctic Village, Anativik Pass, can't think of some of the others, but Wien Airlines built that. But you got to remember that at that time, Wien Airlines was a subsidized airline. And I think we should talk about that a little bit. And I did a book extensively in the book. In 1938, I believe it was, the Civil Aeronautics Board was born. And it became known that they're building highways in the South 48, and the highways of Alaska would be the airports. And so they authorized the expenditure for Wien Airlines to build some airports. They weren't all of them, but, and of course the military had built those airports we just talked about. But because we were, as an airline, we were anxious to be able to put bigger airplanes, and quit bush flying, so to speak, with skis, and which were hard on airplanes.
Yeah, and when you have a runway and everything, it's like, okay, now we know what the dimensions of the runway are. Being subsidized means what? What did that mean?
It means that they felt, rightly so, and it's kind of still in existence as far as the state ferry, for instance, and airports, rural airports, is other communities are connected in the South 48 by highways. And so it's appropriate that they subsidize service into the rural areas of Alaska. And the way the formula went was most of the airlines were paid $1.29 a ton mile, and I don't know how they came up with it. For every ton mile, in Wien in particular, we had a lot of outlying areas. Northern Consolidated had some, but even though they were under the same formula, they didn't abide by it as much as we did. I use an example in my book where Fort Yukon, some people in the village there wanted to get their kids out of town, and so they went up the Porcupine River and started a new village. Then they petitioned the Civil Aeronautics Board for airmail service. And so very often I would fly a float plane to Fort Yukon, take the mail to them, and pick up maybe a little bag of mail to go to this little village up the Porcupine River. No money in that, $1.29 a ton mile. They didn't pay for anything, but it was our obligation to do that. So you didn't make any money. We never did make any money at $1.29 a ton mile, but we were paid a subsidy for the difference between the profit and loss, and 11% of your capital investment for profit. And
so there were certain companies that knew how to take advantage of that and basically make money off the taxpayer.
Actually, when Northern Consolidated and Wien merged, they were smaller, had a smaller route, but they had a better balance sheet because they paid more attention to the profit side than we did. My Uncle Sig, we really took the obligation serious.
So do you want to talk just a little bit about your book? We've mentioned it during the podcast a little bit.
Yeah, I guess one of my concerns is you don't need to read the book if I'm telling her all about it. But hopefully I'm stimulating interest in it.
I think you are stimulating interest, and we haven't scratched the surface, in my opinion, of what is covered in the book. And
there's so much more detail in the book and so many other stories.
Yeah, we'll put a link to the book so that people can find where to buy it. Thanks for taking your time and sharing these stories with us. I hope people find value in it. I'm sure they will, and I hope they get your book. I appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you for watching. You've obviously enjoyed this content. So remember, subscribe to our channel, and if you want to be alerted when we release new videos, ring the bell. Also, if you want to read Richard's book, The Flying Wiens, which I highly recommend, by the way, click the link in the video description where it can be purchased. Thank you.